Good evening, and welcome to our celebration of the New Year. Actually, our celebration of the New Day, the traditional time in Persian New Year. And once again, Sima Siddiq has produced a delightful evening for us. I'm Ed Mallon. I'm the Associate Dean of the Isabel Farrington College of Education, Sacred Heart, and a good friend and colleague of Sima's. I'm very pleased to thank you for coming and welcome you to our presentation this evening. I can say to you, with apologies, Aida Shoma Morabat, Mubarak. Happy New Year. Thank you so much. You're very kind.
مرسی، ممنون. با سلام خدمت همه کسانی که تشریف آوردن از دور و بر کنتیکت یا آمریکا، همه دوستان ایرانی و آمریکایی و هر جای دنیا که هستین. خیلی ممنون که آمدین. سال نوتون مبارک. انشالله که سال خوبی برای شما باشه. ممنون که به برنامه آمدین و امیدوارم که از این برنامه لذت ببرین. Thank you very much. مرسی.
Thank you so very much. The evening we have planned tonight includes some scholarly discourse, some inspirational poetry, and some music which is intended to be both contemplative meditation and fiery. So I'd like to bring to the stage Dr. Hadi Joran, if you would join us, please. Dr. Joran is a classic scholar in Arabic, Persian, Ottoman Turkish. He is also an academic, a mathematician, a physicist, has taught at Princeton University, at University of British Columbia, and at Yale University. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Dr. Hadi Joran.
Good evening. Before anything, I would like to thank the Sacred Heart University and Dr. Siddiq for the invitation, and thank you all for being here. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about the history of Nowruz and some of the customs. So on March 20th last, shortly after this 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Nowruz arrived. Nowruz means new day in Persian, as many of you know. The day being like a garment you wear every day, my grandmother explained. It is the time for you to change the garment of day into a new one, a new day. Just like nature is changing, putting on a new garment of green. Sometimes dubbed the Persian or Iranian New Year, a term that I find confusing at best. Nowruz is the New Year festival celebrated by many West Asian nations alike. Persians, Azeris, Afghans, Kurds, Tajiks, and many more. Within and without the boundaries of the country of Iran. In a way, Nowruz, being a celebration of spring, the beginning of a new life cycle, has a universal quality to it, which I always thought makes it a natural choice, as in suggested by nature, for the new year. More so, the particular moment that is celebrated by these nations as the exact moment of the arrival of the new year, Tahvil Sal, or Sal Tahvil, sometimes erroneously called Sal Tahvil, has a celestial quality to it, as it is the exact moment of the vernal equinox. That is the moment that the sun crosses the celestial equator in its apparent rotation around the earth. Thus, it is the arrival of celestial spring in the northern hemisphere, when the length of the day and the night match, and hence the beginning of a new celestial year, although not necessarily a calendar year, which is one and the same for everyone everywhere on this planet. Indeed, the calendar year, according to Jalali calendar, for example, various versions of which have been in use in the region, it may or may not precede the moment of equinox. The calendar year sometimes starts before Tahvil Sal and sometimes after, as was the case this year. It is called Tahvil Sal, since at this moment, the sun in its apparent path across the sky, against the backdrop of the distant fixed stars, leaves the zodiac sign Pisces, Hut, the fish, to enter the Aries, Hamal, Ram, that is the constellation Ram. That is to say, the sun is delivered or handed Tahvil, that's the term Tahvil, from Pisces to Aries. The Jalali calendar is a solar calendar system very similar to, yet different from, the Gregorian calendar, which has been in use from very old times and named after its last correction from the Seljuk times. Although no doubt a celebration of spring as the start of the warmer days and a new cycle of agriculture and life has been celebrated in various forms around the globe from time immemorial. The first day of the calendar year, then, the first of Farvardin, is the New Year's Day celebrated from pre-Islamic times. The myriad ways in which this day is celebrated and the numerous customs at the same time unifying trends as well as peculiarities depending on the time and the locality where Nowruz is celebrated. Some of those traditions, as I remember from my childhood growing up in Iran, were gathering of all of the nuclear family in your best new clothes, around the ceremonial cloth, Sofre Haftin, adorned according to tradition with 7 items whose names start with the letter Sin. That would include some seasonally appropriate items such as green grass, sabze, an apple, seep, as well as somewhat more peculiar ones like garlic, seer, and vinegar, sirke. A mirror or a bowl of water, no doubt symbolizing light. Goldfish, which I grew to learn was a rather recent and borrowed from a Chinese tradition, as well as a book, which is by definition a comparatively recent addition since books have not been around that long, compared to say green grass or apples. Growing up in a rather religious family, I remember the really nice old Quran my father would take out only on such rare special occasions to put on Haftin, and it was a central piece. I soon found out that there is a variation in that theme available as well, since Nowruz is celebrated by many non-Muslims also, not to mention those who would use instead, or in addition, other books such as the collected poems of Hafiz, or another significant book too, usually a book of poetry. We would sit around the ceremonial cloth, Sofre Haftin, mostly silent but incredibly excited and joyful, waiting for the cannon shot that announced the arrival of the new year. One eye on all the sweets and nuts prepared in anticipation of guests visiting, most of which the kids would have in the end anyway. Everything from the house meticulously cleaned and renovated, the new cloth, and the festive Haftin indicated the major celebration with the theme of renewal. Some of the items on Haftin proclaim that ever so clearly. The green grass, for example, for which you germinate seeds days before in anticipation of the new year to come, and you keep until the official end of the festivities, the Sizdabedar. Picnic on the 13th day, again most probably Babylonian roots, from what we know from Babylonian mathematics and the use of base 60 instead of base 10, division of day into 12 hours, and hour into 60 minutes is a remnant of Babylonian mathematics, as you know. That is what I remember growing up in Iran. The Nowruz festival in Iran spares no pomp and is by far the largest celebration, outshining even the greatest religious celebrations of a religious nation. Elsewhere, such as the Kurdish areas in Iraq and Turkey, or wherever else the culture celebrated is in political minority, Nowruz can be a more private affair, although by no means less jovial celebration. Likewise, Nowruz is celebrated by the expatriate societies from the said nations, that is the present company. These beautiful old traditions and their ties to nature, rather than any standing or fallen political entity, have brought the many peoples who celebrate it together and underlined and emphasized the humanity that we all share. Nowruz is a perfect opportunity for the people who celebrate it, and even those who don't, to celebrate the nature together as the human race, and not labeled with any sort of political or national labels. Labels which are the products of a nationalism which is itself a child of the European politics of the recent centuries only. Yet sadly, this grand tradition is in a way also a victim of politics to a degree. First of all, its designation as the quote Iranian New Year, which may alienate and offend those among us who are not Iranian yet count Nowruz among their traditions, entirely has to do with the designation of one of the major countries that celebrates it with the term Iran, originally a rather poetic term referring to the lands of the Persians, in some vague sense, or Iran Zamin as we know it, as the almost mythical land where those who share that culture and heritage live. So some refer to this feast as the Iranian New Year, as in belonging to Iran, not the modern country, but that mythical land where the people with such shared cultures live. The common usage of the term Iran to refer to a modern state, on the other hand, presents some problems. Others prefer to call it the Persian New Year, which is again problematic for similar reasons. I will therefore stick to the term Nowruz, New Day, without any such labelings. Secondly, certain misconceptions and myths about Nowruz have been popularized, partly within the Iranian society and by extension among the expat societies, also influencing others. One that you may have heard many times or even uttered yourself when describing Nowruz to the well-meaning, unsuspecting foreigner is telling him that Nowruz is, quote, an ancient Iranian or Persian, as some prefer to call themselves, New Year festival celebrated by the great Iranian nation since Achaemenid times. Or, quote, it is an ancient Persian Achaemenid tradition that has been preserved to this date, unquote. Some of such utterances are even backed/documented by the random zealous expat, usually on the internet, although mostly of the creative mind variety. Thus, if we want to be charitable, is due to well-meaning and no doubt presumed harmless exaggeration, and if we are less charitable, a distortion and abuse of a history and culture and customs that could eventually lead to this great tradition's marginalization or disappearance. The basic underlying principle of these distortions is equating everything that has to do with Iran, the cultural unit and the mythical land, with that of the country of Iran, which is today not only just a small corner of the former, but also has moved around significantly over the centuries. That this claim is outright false barely needs a proof. Different courts that celebrated and preserved Nowruz were located in what is located outside the present-day Iran, for example, the Samanids in Central Asia, the Ghaznavids in Afghanistan, and the Sassanids in Iraq. Nor is it even true that those who did necessarily spoke Persian in one form or another. What compounds this even further is the very history of Iran was defined and idealized in the 20th century, and spread rapidly thanks to the moment of prosperity that Iran was experiencing following the discovery of oil and Iran's share of the market of this essential commodity. The Iran of the Pahlavi era came to claim lineage and legitimacy for all things Iranian from the ancient Achaemenids, a superior empire that ruled from around 500 BC to about 330 BC. That is the date of Alexander's campaign. The vast Achaemenid empire stretched at times as far west as even Greece and Egypt. Various ruling dynasties of Iran, even those that did not rule the area that is called Iran today, sought legitimacy by tracing their lineage to ancient kings of the heroic mythology of Iran, some of which have been faithfully preserved in the Book of Kings, Shahnameh, as you know. Yet this phenomenon reached new heights and found new dimensions following the European archaeological discoveries in the region during the 19th and 20th centuries that all of a sudden informed us of the Achaemenids in detail and replaced the heroes of Shahnameh with them. So the Pahlavis chose the Achaemenids as their historical ancestors. This in time mashed the Achaemenids into an all-purpose symbol and a hero of both Iranian identity as well as Iranian history as a politically, scientifically, culturally, and religiously superior Iran, to whom may be traced back all things great about Iran, or indeed the entire world. This Achaemenid fetish, as I call it, in time, grew branches and leaves. Cyrus the Great, for example, the founder, was found to be also the author of the first Declaration of Human Rights, based on an artifact which is basically a conquest decree in the tradition of the empires he replaced, namely that of the Babylonians and the Assyrians. And sometimes raised to a prophet. Iran was declared the inventor of the modern postal system or even a highway system, thanks to hordes of alternative historians that fed on various propaganda before or after the Pahlavi era, and perpetuate not just the entertaining victory, the fiction history melange, but also sadly abhorrible supremacist racist views, for instance in their insisting on the use of the term Aryan, so awfully tainted and undefendable really. In this tradition then, it is not hard to see how the festival of Nowruz, the quintessential Iranian festival that survived the test of times, would find its fantastic genealogy back to the Achaemenids. The scholars inform us that Nowruz was a Zoroastrian adaptation of an ancient rite, which is not hard to imagine, given its obvious natural significance. Indeed, the Achaemenids were Zoroastrians after some point, but the particular way in which Nowruz was developed under the Achaemenids has to do with the issue of calendar reform after conquest of Egypt by Cambyses. Cambodian, where he was introduced to the new 365-day calendar year of the Egyptians. Yet there is no evidence that it was adopted quickly. The Bisutun inscription of Darius the Great has recorded dates in the lunar Perso-Babylonian calendar, which is much older and had undergone major reforms already. It was not until well after Darius that the new solar calendar came to be used in any capacity. The Achaemenid period is ill-documented, and we have but comparatively few inscriptions left from that period, so all our knowledge about it ultimately derives from later sources. There is an indication of some sort of spring festivities on the occasion of New Year of the reformed Achaemenid calendar that incorporated the Zoroastrian festival in it. But since the calendar year was not exact, or did not match the natural year very well, I should say, this would require Nowruz to have traveled so far that by the end of that period, it would have fallen in the summer practically. The earliest description we have of spring festivities is from the Aracid period, Ashkanian. However, and that only through a much later attestation of it, which is Fakhreddin Asad Gorgani's romance of Visor-Amin from the early Islamic period. The festivities amounted to a banquet by the king for vassal kings and notables in an open and among blossoming trees, and horse racing with wine and music. That is while the calendar year kept receding and the 1st of Farvardin was several months away from the spring at the time. The unification of the two to any degree is a much later phenomenon. That is the calendar reform of the 6th century of the Common Era, a period marked by a long reign of the Sassanid monarch Khosrow I Anushirvan. It is in a way this moment in the history of the world that has lived in various forms to influence countless later cultures to this date. Let me clarify. The Sassanids consciously adopted the rhetoric to situate themselves as the heir to the ancient Persians, reviving their religion and reclaiming their empire, this time mainly against Byzantine Greeks. By incorporating much of that ideology into their administrative practices, it is them hence who incorporate the almost mythological original Nowruz celebration, whatever that it may be, meld it with Zoroastrian religious relics, and produce it anew credited to the mythological king Jamshid of the Shahnameh as the utmost celebration of the new year, marking the New Year's Day in the new revised calendar. The legacy of the Sassanids, on the other hand, has endured so long due to several historical factors. One of them was the advent of Islam and the conquest of Sassanid Persia, followed shortly thereafter by the Abbasid revolution and the Abbasid court's adaptation of the Sassanian model of kingship. While the Abbasids consciously adapted many of the court customs and practices of the Sassanids and made it the new Islamic normative high culture, a parallel strand of Sassanid culture lived on in the distant east, in Khorasan, which was never really fully subdued. The remarkable linguistic continuity of the region, for example, which produced a new Persian language, is a clear testament to that. In Khorasan, a name which once more is today applied to a much smaller territory in Iran than it originally was, the idea of the Sassanids lived on, and soon came back to life through the patronage of various courts such as the Safarids, the Samanids, and the Ghaznavids. It is in this eastern milieu that the ultimate compilation of the Sassanid Book of Kings, Shahnameh, and its versification through the genius of Abul Qasim Ferdowsi took place, which made a deep mark on many cultures for many centuries, an influence which persists to this date. Through major migrations westward of various nations out of Central and Inner Asia, starting with the Seljuk Turks and intensified with Mongols, the core cultures of Khorasan, various heirs of Samanids, spread westwards far and wide into the Iranian plateau, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and even India. The big moment in the history of the region is perhaps Hulagu's Western campaign to complete the conquest of Persia, which changed the course of history in the lands conquered and unified by him, the Ilkhanate, which he named Iran. Iran is the name Hulagu picks for this region, styling after the Sassanids. The ideology and practices of the founders of this new Iran were adopted by various successor states, from Safavids to Qajars. So when we talk of Nowruz, there are in fact different things that we are talking about that have their own distinct and complicated histories, and yet somehow they have been blended together as one. The celebration of the vernal equinox as the official time when the spring arrives, and which has clear agricultural significance, was celebrated by ancient civilizations well before the Persians and the Achaemenids. The Iranians arrived in the land of Iran first as migratory populations, nomads and pastoralists. Once they arrived at the plains of the Iranian plateau, they met settled agricultural societies, who are peculiarly referred to in the Shahnameh as Div. The Div of the Shahnameh are the local population of the Iranian plateau. Many customs of whom they adopted as their own. Their timekeeping practices and calendar were adopted by the new settling Iranian nomads as the new overlords. The dates of Nowruz and the spring, however, diverged due to inaccuracies of the calendars, and each took a life of their own. Several attempts were made for a reform and unifying of the two, both under the Sassanids as well as under the Abbasids. Some medieval Islamic mathematicians allude to that. The latest of such reforms was carried out in Isfahan under the patronage of Seljuk ruler Jalaluddin Malik Shah, and a group of mathematicians entrusted with this task, headed by the famous Omar Khayyam, who also authored Nowruznameh, which I strongly encourage you to read, available now thanks to the brilliant edition by the late scholar Mojtaba Minovi. The new calendar was not used as the official calendar, however, until the 20th century, and in particular the Pahlavi period in Iran, an era when the festival seeped into the concept of political and territorial hegemony of Iran. As Nowruz continues a life of its own, it adopts and sheds customs according to the habits of the people who practice it. The merging of the fire festival of Char-Sham-Suri, which is itself a modified of a harvest fest of sorts, with Nowruz, for example, is one. Haftzin, Sizabedar, and other customs which I mentioned in the beginning are the others, many of which probably go back to the Safavid period. I've heard this repeatedly by historians and have found some truth to it myself, that Iran has changed little since. Who knows how other customs will change in the future? We have already started redecorating the Haftzin, the changing books on the table, for example. Will the next generation put a Kindle or an iPad on the Haftzin table? This way it could accommodate grandmas insisting on the traditional Quran and perhaps some light reading like Harry Potter for the youth. The organizers requested that I include a bit of something relevant to the subject of the talk from the old Zoroastrian prayers. I glanced through the Gathas to find the yasna suitable for the occasion. And although I picked a quotation that reflects some of the mood, perhaps, not so much in celebration of spring, but in a way as taking a moment to think about it all, to see what it means. And that is from Yasna 31, verse number 22. And thus he spoke, "Clear is this all to the man of wisdom, as it is to the one who thinks with care." Thank you for your attention.
It is, of course, our hope that by attempting to learn and understand cultures, the people can come together, and that we can experience greater hope for a future in this world. We'd like to invite you to experience another dimension of this culture through the poems of Hafiz. He was a 12th century Iranian poet whose collected works infiltrate the foundations of culture of the Persian world since that time and even till today, where his writings represent the kinds of guides or sayings that become part of the common culture of a people. And so I'd like to invite Dr. Robin McAllister of Sacred Heart's English Department to join us on stage and to read the translations of some of Hafiz's poetry. And so that we can enjoy the texture of the language, we'd like to invite Hannah Lynn to come back and allow us to enjoy the same words in another language.
نوبهار است در آن کوش که خوشگل باشی، که بسی گل بدمد و تو در گل باشی. من نگویم که کنون با که نشین و چه بنوش، که تو خود دانی اگر زیرک و عاقل باشی. چنگ در پرده همی میدهدت پند، ولی وزر آنگاه کند سود که عاقل باشی. در چمن هر ورقی دفتر حالی دگر است، حیف باشد که ز حال همه غافل باشی. گرچه راهی است پر از بیم ز ما تا پر دوست، رفتن آسان بودت واقف منزل باشی. نقد عمرت ببرد غصه دنیا به گزاف، گر شب و روز در این قصه مشکل باشی. حافظا گر مدد از بخت بلندت باشد، صید آن شاهد مطلوب شمایل باشی.
Fresh spring, be joyous in its spirit. Alone in the city, roses bloom. Within the veil, the harp gives you wisdom. Be worthy of the harp. Sit, drink with the wise. In the woods, every leaf tells its own story. Do not forget past times. The way to the friend is a valley of fear. Easy is the path if you know the way. The anguish of the world drains life's wealth. If night and day you follow this difficult tale, O Hafiz, if from lofty fortune you are the prey of the beloved, you shall be marked with excellence.